why I deserve to be here. It's always the crash I return to.
Returnal's opening sequence sends a palpable chill down my spine without being altogether unique. Crash land on a planet in search of the alluring white shadow signal as daunting and hyper-specific flashes torture precious Selene. Survive. Abandon Helios. Though you came here against Astra orders, you must find the white shadow and escape this hostile but not entirely alien planet. Simple enough, right? Maybe so if we look at this as a game. But what if we look at it as something more? When does it stop being a game and start being pain? Also, what do our favorite video games say about us? Do RPGs imply that we crave escapism and adventure? Final Fantasy playtimes in the save file might suggest that. Do first-person shooters satisfy our craving for adrenaline? Maybe, if you're American. And are puzzle games how we conquer entropy, or at least live out our best Jimmy Neutron fanfics? What does loving Returnal say? A notoriously difficult game about the cosmic horror of grief, about fighting an existential dread from which you cannot escape. See, a console's launch title says something pretty strong for a game system as well. Consoles used to live or die based entirely on the games available at initial release, and those games might inform the console's identity. Think about the GameCube with Luigi's Mansion, an underrated GOAT. Dreamcast had Sonic, the Xbox launched the Master Chief, and this eldritch god conquered everything. And though the PS5 technically launched with Demon's Souls and Spider-Man Miles Morales, both solid games in their own right, the true launch title in my mind for the PS5 was the absolute masterpiece, Returnal, a third-person roguelite horror shooter. Much like the PS5's initial availability in the middle of a pandemic, Returnal's statement is one of pain. Both in gameplay and narrative, its effect on the player is immense through the many deaths experienced. This game sits right next to Elden Ring at the top of my list of games that got me back into being a gamer. Made by Swedish developer House Marquee and director Harry Kruger as their flagship AAA title under the Sony umbrella, Returnal serves as an example of everything that a video game can and should be. The H.P. Lovecraftian themes are apparent even just looking at the box art, and in case you were wondering how seriously they take those tones, just check out the in-house promotional developer interview that they did that they basically turned into a psychological horror movie. This game is not getting enough love because it is already turning into an all-time classic. And I think you need to know about its merits because this game is awe-inspiring, nightmarishly difficult, and tragically painful in a reminiscent way that is similar to another favorite game of mine. Hopefully I can convince you to go really give Returnal a fair shot, even though it's probably going to break your thumbs, and it might even break your heart. It makes the catharsis of beating the game all that much sweeter when you attach yourself to it, because you can push the boulder all the way up that mountain Sisyphus, even if Selene can't. But let's start this light. Let's return to 2021 and Returnal. After Selene abandons Helios and steps out into the Atropos ruins, you walk through the first few doors. Right away, we understand the tone. It's the Metroid we always wanted. Samus Aran slotted into the universe of aliens, but with more intense action. Your pitiful pistol fires vicious shots into a series of relatively challenging first enemies that look somewhat halfway between humanity's darkest fears and Squidward leaning into his dark side. But hey, it's great! You shelled out $70, so you've probably seen or heard that the rooms are meant to be random. Maybe this first sequence is just to set the tone. This dark, overgrown ruin, which is most certainly not an allegory, can't be too overwhelmingly... Okay, let's address the elephant in the room here. This game is legit hard, and there are a lot of videos that talk about this game that mention how most people that play it can't even fathom the rest of the game outside of the first biome, and just looking at the PlayStation trophies and the Steam achievements really confirms that. I personally don't struggle in some of my clips until the second half of the game, but you guys didn't see my first playthrough that lasted 29 hours back in 2021. The developers know this game is hard, and they want it that way. And to anyone who's upset, you know what they have to say to your pain? Look at him suffer! Maybe some people really want to enjoy the world of Elden Ring without having to grind endlessly against bosses because they're just simply too tough. And maybe some people really like the aesthetic of Cuphead, but find that the difficulty is just too punishing and sort of pads out the playtime like it really does. I'm not here to shame people that need an easier difficulty, and I'm not here to criticize those that simply say get good. But what should you do about difficulty when the game itself is an artistic statement against struggle? Should the game be easier? Look, games are works of art. I know saying that makes me sound like I'm pretentious and sniff my own farts. But a game's difficulty should be fixed and inflexible. The most common use case for multiple difficulties is adjusting the resistances or buffs to damage and health, or the timing windows for actions. Changing a difficulty rarely changes a game's underlying mechanics, which is why you mostly see difficulty options in shooters, action RPGs, sports games, places where you can adjust the variable AI behavior, speed, and timing. Unlockable ultra-hard modes are fine after completing a game, but why include it in the baseline? Many of the greats don't conform to this. Celeste doesn't give you a difficulty slider. That would defeat the purpose. Elden Ring's world just is. You either conquer it or let it conquer you. Hell, Mario games don't give you a difficulty, technically, and Returnal is hard as hell. It isn't particularly complex in terms of its gameplay either. You use one weapon over the course of the whole game. Sure, you get different options and can swap out guns that have different speed or spread, homing, charging, whatever. You're a gamer. You get this. Hell, the levels at their most literal interpretations aren't unique either. Forest, desert, mountain, swamp, ice, ocean. Look at the originality. Mario did it. This game looks like it's taking something simple and just makes it hard for no reason. But Returnal does a lot of small little things mechanically that make it uniquely challenging, and it's worth the effort. When you strip down the gameplay to one or two specific concepts like shooting and platforming, you allow for a lot more freedom to explore new options, like when collecting health items at full capacity, you increase your maximum. The upgrades that you can buy at the fabricators in each run might not carry over with you permanently, but they do affect the way that you do that run specifically. Like maybe you want to unlock the yellow blade that will allow you to go in some more of the side areas and get more stuff, or you just upgrade your base health because you're getting deeper and you need a little bit more of assurance. Because most items, just like in real life, don't respawn with you upon your death and repeating the cycle, you don't have to worry about a million things every single run unless you're getting deep enough that they matter. You simply have to adapt to every run with the changing difficulty of where you're at then. More games need to adopt basically what Returnal is forcing you to in terms of its difficulty. The adaptability of this game is part of the story, and it honestly just makes it so good that it makes me angry that more games can't competently fuse these two ideas of gameplay difficulty and their story in a cohesive way. But what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to have a cohesive vision that gameplay and story both follow?
Would it be safe for me to drive afterwards? But what about prep time and recovery? I'm in the middle of a lot right now, so...
Oh hey look, the bargaining stage. What a perfect time for me to please ask you to subscribe. If you are not already subscribed to the channel and you're 7 minutes deep into this, I hope that means you're enjoying it, and I would please ask that you subscribe. I really enjoy making more serious videos like this that explore a topic in a more meaningful way, so if you like that and you want me to keep doing that, please subscribe, please like the video so that more people can see it, and yeah, thank you so much, and now back to the video. Binding of Isaac, Hades, Inscription, even Enter the Gungeon. Roguelikes are appealing for a lot of reasons, usually because they're cheaper and made by smaller studios, but chief among them is that these games reward you for becoming proficient at the gameplay itself. There may be a sharp learning curve, but in becoming accustomed to the unique mechanics of a system, you learn to appreciate the game's intent, and you love the gameplay more than the world it's in. They don't hold your hand, you must improve, you must conquer, you simply overcome. It's not the story that grips you necessarily. Too many games focus on material components like a story, or beating a big bad ugly guy, or checking off a list of collectibles, or even a completion percentage leading to a trophy. Lots of AAA games pretend to be all cinematic and interesting, but don't actually have anything of substance. I'm showing Horizon Forbidden West, Far Cry, and unfortunately Fallout 4 in the background for a reason. The stories in these games pretend to be of the highest importance, but most of the time they amount to something hollow because the gameplay gets in the way. I don't care about Aloy's journey in Forbidden West because it seems like she's always distracted by needless side quests that don't do anything new mechanically, or playing a random board game rather than killing the robot dinosaurs, which, you know, is the best part of the game. Literally no one in Far Cry has been interesting to me in years. Stop showing cutscenes, Ubisoft, just let me shoot people. And Fallout 4 was one of the biggest letdowns of a story I've ever experienced. By the time the big twist with your kid happens, all the factions had gone stupid, and the role-playing options were out the window, incredibly binary. Sure, the gameplay in these games is usually good, or even outstanding, but too often that gameplay and the story do not match, or seem like they're in completely different worlds. Sometimes one is even sacrificed for the sake of propping up the other. Hell, sometimes both are dropped for the sake of online play and microtransactions. So isn't it amazing when a game can actually have stellar gameplay and an interesting story? Think about how rare it is for a game to truly excel in both of those. Really think about it. especially a AAA or a roguelike, it doesn't matter which. Returnal is perfectly aligned to teach you how to get better. And more importantly than the game itself, those mechanics and collectibles and gameplay components and getting better become part of the story, encouraging you to explore and improve yourself. It's what Celine wants, nay, needs. And just like in real life, your ability to empathize with her is pivotal in wanting to continue. Now, I'm not going to pretend like Returnal has a story that is straightforward, easy to understand, or even presented straight to the audience. That can be a huge turnoff for some people. To most casual observers, there's almost no tangible story happening. The experience of playing Returnal all the way through is this: navigate through the overgrown ruins, Crimson Wastes, Derelict Citadel, and receive snippets of Celine's former life through audio logs or in flashes when you inevitably die. Discover something in every new room that's left behind by a supposedly ancient alien race that's fallen into ruin, right down to the archives depicting their rise and fall. Every tentacled beast or strange automaton flying through the air suggests that the world is overrun by the failings of those beasts. You die over and over even after utilizing the reconstructors to salvage your run, purchasing upgrades at the fabricators, and clearing entire side paths for xenoglyphs that begin to blend the story of this world with Celine's own journey, only to meet it all again in seemingly random ways. Every gun you upgrade, every audio log you recover, and each of the absurd bosses you overcome seem at face value interconnected, but it may not be clear how because the packaging is obtuse. But then you climb the mountain, discover the White Shadow, and Act 2 begins. Though the gameplay does not change, the world does. The overgrown ruins become echoing, playing out Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper in beautiful operatic terms. The hellish Crimson Wastes have frozen over, now fractured. And rather than ascending to the highest point, you sink to the abyssal scar, where your visions become a haunting reality. Helios' ship logs start to become incomprehensible nonsense about Celine's mental state. The haunted house sequences stop seeming like memories of Celine's life, and more like reflections of how she remembers them. Maybe this world isn't real. Maybe the frenetic gameplay isn't just awesome for the sake of good action. Maybe it's representative of something more. That Tower of Sisyphus to the right of the starting area seems less like clever side content and more like an extension of Celine herself, an alternate path to the same end. A game becomes truly special when the storytelling components are about the actions taking place in the gameplay. Again, take Celeste. The game is literally about climbing a mountain, but it's also about Maddie climbing her own metaphorical mountain to conquer depression and anxiety. Shadow of the Colossus is about fighting titans and bargaining with a dark god. And Wander Story is about reversing unbearable tragedy and trying to slay that titan while also succumbing to darkness. And it doesn't even have to be a powerful story or anything that we're talking about. Just let me pick Pikmin out of the ground and throw them and use them as resources. When everything is cohesive, the gameplay, the story, the setting, the characters, suddenly it transcends that line about controlling Maddie up the mountain, and you transform into her. It becomes real. So what does Returnal amount to with all of its environments and all of the haunted house sequences and all of the cleverly named locations and characters? You're trapped in an infinite loop on a planet that you created, a world that you cannot escape, a world made from your agony. So this is where I'm going to spoil the end of this game and kind of its thematic purposes, but the main points I'm going to talk about are something that I don't think gets discussed enough, so if you want to hear it, please stick around for it. Also, mild trigger warning for death, generational trauma, and I guess child neglect. Even though it's not super explicit, it's still something that comes up. So if you want to skip this section and live it for yourself, totally understand. Please go to this time code. Returnal. What's in a name that by any other name would not be as painful? The title of this game really doesn't raise an eyebrow for most people because unlike other time loop stories, it doesn't really call attention to or make a joke out of its own title. But understanding the story and the allegory and the themes of it really means that the title gives itself away. The story has already been dissected plenty of times by videos like these that are all really good. We could honestly sit here all day and make a ton of videos on like what every little item or artifact means in the grand scheme of things, or how the haunted house sequences are psychologically interesting for Celine's character, but I think doing so robs us of the overall point. We have to understand that Returnal is not a simple time loop story about a woman stuck in hell. It's about grief and trauma, and the futility or outright refusal of acceptance. The literal events of the plot that are happening seem to suggest that everything in the time loop is tangible, But that's simply not the case. And it's not just that it's happening in Celine's head, as some videos have suggested. It's funny that a man so unassuming and toxic like Lovecraft could so frighteningly and precisely pinpoint the event horizon of human perception, bringing words to the definitionless and shape to the incomprehensible. Chief among the terrors on the horizon are the personification of the inner psyche, turning our greatest pains, fears, and insecurities into the most haunting creatures our species can conjure. Shout out Stephen King. Throughout the game, we are reminded every time we die that we have abandoned Helios, our ship, our comfort, our place of respite. For the first half of the game, we abandon it in favor of the wastes and a climb into the heavens in search of salvation. And the crazy thing is that literally, Celine escapes. We witness her life, piecing it together with the other imagery we've seen, to where we can safely assume that all of it does happen to her. But perhaps not in relation to this planet. See, Atropos does not exist. And Celine is not a space pilot. Certain texts scattered in ship logs and files in the haunted house, we actually find out that Celine was denied in her quest to join Astra. We know her mother aspired to it as well, and we know that Celine and her mother loathe one another. We discover that Celine was involved in a car accident with her mother, and likely over the course of Thea's recovery, which left her paralyzed, she began to resent Celine for ruining her career. Celine developed trauma from that resentment. And what's worse is that the game suggests Thea blames her for this accident, and afterwards Celine is constantly blaming herself and working to find the approval of and take care of her broken mother. The planet is Celine, a rendering of her eternal guilt, an unfair burden placed upon her that we must now navigate. So when we see the old school Apollo astronaut, something her mother aspired to, something that follows you everywhere and whose item description reads, "It will not let you go," we understand that Celine is constantly battling her own grief, her own trauma, and guilt. That's the world she traps herself in. But it doesn't end there, because Helios 2 is not a ship, but her son. We even play as him, or more likely Celine's warped perception and memory of him, and come to understand that Celine is likely not a present and loving parent in her own right for her own child, due to the strain between her and Thea, something that the archives and the Tower of Sisyphus only further reinforce. It's suggested that Thea and Helios have a loving relationship, something that Celine winds up using as a reason to resent her own child. As a parent, Celine is dismissive, tired, and struggles to even listen to her son's colorful stories or encourage him. Instead, she's gone. Maybe not physically, but definitely emotionally. The number 836 repeats constantly. The three-pronged eyes are always watching. The sounds of drowning echo every time Celine wakes up from her death. Time marches forward until the ascent turns into a collapse, drowning to the depths where the astronaut comes to battle us in the form of an alien horror. At the end of Act 2, the finale is not a big boss, but rather a car, sunken to the bottom, a memory of the crash that brought her here, and the ichor that cannot be destroyed. The credits roll and the game is over. But still, Act 3. After collecting the secret Sunface fragments in a final loop, we return to the farmhouse and enter the basement to find our mother's wheelchair and remark, "We were both broken." Return to the abyssal scar, unlock the car, and find that the great horror of the depths is not alien at all. It's Thea, and eventually, Celine, a symbol of the past staring coldly through us. Is this astronaut a representation of Celine's contentious relationship with her mother? Probably. Is it a reminder of how her trauma has turned her into the very thing that she despised, a cold and seemingly resentful mother herself? Maybe. But one thing that is not up for debate, like the astronaut, the farmhouse's presence upon Atropos, the unkillable ichor in the ruins, the events in the hospital ward during the Tower of Sisyphus. No, the one thing that's not up for debate is this. Thea and Celine may not have died in their car crash, but Helios did die in his. And Celine has lost her mind. That Apollo astronaut that houses some part of who Celine is, the darkest and most critical part of her, shot down Helios on this world and appeared in the road that caused the accident. Don't fear the Reaper echoes everywhere. Every time you come back here, to this abandoned place beyond the trees, a pain you cannot escape from, Celine is reminded that she abandoned Helios. Returnal is the best action game of 2021. It's also about the death of a child. It's about the generational trauma that parents place on their kids and the guilt those children will internalize. It's about unfulfilled dreams and the self-imposed agony that will torment you over the passing of family, returning you to hell every time you think about it. Return you to the moment that it happened, the music that was playing, and the nemesis that you create for yourself, one that you might have already been unfairly living with. There is no more painful thought or experience in this world. No parent should have to bury their child. To do so is to bury yourself, to die. To blame yourself for their death, to believe you abandoned Helios, condemn yourself to hell, eternal. Chase the white shadow all you want. It may rescue your body, but nothing can rescue your soul, doomed to the hell of Atropos evermore. Returnal. I fell out of gaming for a few years back in like 2018, and I stopped speedrunning at the same time too. And there were a lot of reasons why. I was working full time, I had gotten into a relationship that mercifully became permanent, and I was playing music in a band. Shoutouts to Chico, Ziggy, and Audacious Green. I just couldn't justify spending multiple hours a week playing games that were worthwhile and required me to focus on them, so I just defaulted to a few that were easy to play in the moment or drop when I had to. I told myself that it was fine that I couldn't get a PS5 because of the insane supply and demand around that time. Like, you're just not a gamer now. It's fine. Then one day around Christmas of like 2020, I saw online that they were doing some more like West Coast drops for PS5s at local GameStops, but there was no way that they were going to be available for long. So I decided to randomly call my GameStop to see if they would be getting them and when, and all I heard was, I called again, and still. So I went in person and somehow procured one. I think in some weird way this was the beginning or the inciting incident of my own little hero's journey that led me here to YouTube. The games that I played on PS5 as an adult really kind of informed how I wanted to talk about games and gave me life to want to spread that information. And some of the games were old that I already loved, like Kingdom Hearts or Shadow of the Colossus, and some of them were new, like Elden Ring and Returnal. Enjoying video games for me now is less about the material components of a game, like story, characters, graphics, whatever, and more about what I can get out of those games that will enrich my life or make me think a different way. Or hell, is the game even like fun for me to play? Can I justify giving 4 hours in a day to a video game when something else might require my attention? What Returnal did was it reminded me it was okay to hurt and allow grief to be something that consumes you. But more importantly, to take that grief, accept it, and let it go. And just like Shadow of the Colossus, Returnal tells us that sometimes the deeper you get into something that is beyond your control, the more you can lose your sense of self to it. Celine's pain manifests itself into a world that wants to kill her, and the grief and trauma that she has internalized from a guilt that she definitely does not deserve, what only makes the world that much more powerful. She can't escape her own pain. But we can. We can complete this game, walk away, and while I am in no way, shape, or form a licensed therapist, hopefully we can escape our own self-torment. All it takes is a little practice. To treat life itself like a roguelike and learn to adapt to it. Don't drown yourself in the abyss of your own creation because you're not alone in this world. Climb that mountain towards whatever calls you there and return to that hospital, heal, and forgive yourself for any of your own Helioses. And hopefully you never return to that place ever again. If you feel caught up in your own vicious cycle with Helios keeping you there, go get help. Maybe beat this game. Most importantly, don't fear the Reaper, but definitely don't seek it out. Instead, follow your own white shadow of the moon. Learn to accept your grief and let it go. All right, I guess this is where I say like, comment, and subscribe, and I would really appreciate it if you do. I think more importantly, I want to thank my own IRL co-op Returnal partner, Lisa. Though playing co-op in Returnal ultimately does not help Celine escape her cycle, you helped me escape mine, and since then I have never returned to my Atropos. And to everyone else watching, I genuinely thank you for watching to the end. I hope you all have a lovely day, pleasant evening, or a fun weekend. Yeah, love y'all. Bye.